Welcome to this deep dive. Today we're focusing on what looks like a really promising development for a serious health issue, diabetic foot ulcers.
That's right. You shared some info with us from a company called Cytora.
Yeah, we've got their press release right here, and our goal really is to figure out how significant these initial results from their phase 12A trial might be. It's for a stem cell treatment.
Exactly. It's early data, sure,
Mm.
but it looks like it could offer something new for a really tough problem. Maybe before we jump into Cytora's specific tech, we should quickly cover what we mean by diabetic foot ulcers, DFUs.
Good idea. So what are they exactly, the basics?
Okay, so DFUs, they're essentially open sores, wounds, really, that
Yep.
people with diabetes can get on their feet.
And the info we have points to a few reasons, right? Poor circulation.
Yep, poor blood flow, nerve damage, which is neuropathy,
Right, neuropathy.
and just the body's general ability to heal being, well, impaired by the diabetes itself.
And these aren't trivial things, are they? They can get really serious.
Oh, absolutely. The press release is pretty clear there's a real risk of severe infections, even gangrene.
Which can lead to amputation, that's mentioned too.
Tragically, yes.
Yeah.
And it's not uncommon. The stats suggest, what, somewhere between maybe 19% and 34% of people with diabetes will get a DFU.
Wow, that's a lot of people. Almost up to a third.
It's a huge number. A really significant portion of the diabetic community is at risk.
So what about current treatments? I mean, what do doctors do now?
Well, the standard stuff is, careful wound care, managing any infection that crops up, trying to take pressure off the foot offloading, they call it.
And keeping blood sugar under control, obviously.
Definitely. That's fundamental. And then there are more advanced therapies too, like skin grafts, hyperbaric oxygen,
Growth factors.
growth factors, right. But even with all that, the outcomes aren't always what you'd hope for.
What do the numbers say? The healing rate?
The source material suggests it's only around 75%.
Only 75, okay.
And maybe more concerning, the amputation rate is still stuck at about 17%.
17%. That really underlines how serious this is. It's not just a wound.
Not at all. And the mortality rate associated with DFUs is significantly higher than for diabetes alone. Plus, the economic cost, it's huge.
Yeah, let's touch on that. The burden on the system.
Well, in the U.S. alone, you're looking at roughly 1.2 million new DFU cases every year.
9.2 million. Wow.
And the average treatment cost, around $20,000 per ulcer.
20,000.
And if it gets severe, maybe involves amputation, it could easily go over $40,000. Globally, it's like a $7.6 billion market.
Okay, so huge problem, high cost, current treatments have limitations. That's the stage nicely for something new.
Exactly. Which brings us to Cytora.
Right, Cytora, a biopharmaceutical company set up in 2018 focused on stem cells, and their approach sounds, well, different.
It really does. They're working on what they call an off-the-shelf stem cell treatment. That means it's allogeneic.
Allogeneic meaning from a donor, not the patient themselves.
Correct. Healthy donor cells.
Okay.
And the specific type of cell is really interesting. Human oral mucosa stem cells,
Mhm.
ADOMESC.
Oral mucosa, so from the mouth, inside the cheek, that kind of thing.
Precisely. The lining of the mouth. It's not the first place you'd think of for stem cells to treat foot ulcers, maybe.
Definitely not. So what's special about these mouth cells? Where do they come from?
Well, the origin is kind of fascinating. There's a specific stem cell type found there, but they actually originate from something called the neural crest.
Neural crest. That seems familiar, like early embryonic development.
Exactly. It's a primordial tissue from when the brain and nervous system are first forming. And that origin seems to give these HOMSCs some pretty unique abilities.
Like what? The press release mentions how quickly the mouth heals, right? Without scars.
That's the key insight, yeah. The mouth shows incredibly rapid wound healing, full tissue regeneration, often without scarring.
Okay.
And crucially, the source material emphasizes that this healing ability in the mouth doesn't seem to be majorly affected by age or even by diabetes.
Wait, really? So the very thing that messes up healing in the feet?
It doesn't seem to hit these oral stem cells nearly as hard.
That sounds like a massive advantage for treating DFUs.
It certainly seems that way. And there's a practical aspect too, scalability.
How so?
Cytora found they can take a tiny biopsy, just a few millimeters, from a healthy donor's mouth.
Tiny, okay.
And from that, they can apparently grow enough cells to treat potentially thousands of patients.
Thousands. From one tiny biopsy. That's incredibly efficient. Addresses potential supply issues, maybe?
Potentially, yeah. It speaks well for manufacturing down the line.
But using donor cells, always raises the question of safety immune rejection. What does the info say about that?
That's always a huge hurdle with allogeneic therapies. But the press release suggests a really good safety profile for these HOMSCs.
How so?
They mention high therapeutic potency, but also an excellent safety record. And critically, no signs of immune rejection when transplanted into different recipients.
No immune rejection, that's big.
It is. That's what makes the whole off-the-shelf idea workable. If the body doesn't attack the donor cells, you don't need patient-specific matching necessarily.
Okay, so unique cells, promising properties, potentially scalable, and maybe safe from an immune perspective. Let's get into the trial then. Phase 12A, how was it set up?
Right, so this was done at a single center in Israel. It was randomized.
Meaning patients got treatment or placebo by chance?
Exactly. And partially blinded to reduce bias. They had 3 groups. One got a low dose of the HOMSC 200 treatment, one got a high dose, and one got a placebo.
And the placebo was just standard care.
Standard wound care, yes, which all patients received anyway.
Got it. How many people were in the study? And what were their ulcers like?
21 subjects participated, and the press release really stresses these were tough cases. Chronic ulcers.
How chronic?
The average time they'd had the wound was over 2 years. 27 months on average.
27 months. So these weren't new ulcers that might heal easily anyway. These were the really stubborn ones.
Precisely the kind that current treatments often fail to resolve.
Okay. And the treatment itself, just one injection.
A single administration, yes. Either low dose OMSC 200, high dose, or placebo. Then they were followed for 18 months while continuing standard care.
18 months follow-up. And the main goal of this early trial? Safety first, usually.
Primarily safety, yes. Looking for any adverse events related to the treatment. And specifically, watching for any immune response, any rejection of the cells.
And secondary goals? Effectiveness.
Secondary endpoints were looking at wound closure rates, both partial and complete closure.
So let's start with safety. What did they find?
The results there look very positive, according to the release. No adverse events were recorded that were deemed related to the AMI-SELE-200 treatment.
None at all.
That's what's reported. And maybe even more importantly, they didn't detect any immune response, humoral or cellular, against the injected cells.
No immune reaction. That really backs up the earlier point about them being well tolerated. Very encouraging.
Extremely encouraging for an off-the-shelf product, yes.
Okay, safety looks good in this small group. What about efficacy? Did it actually help heal the ulcers?
The data suggests it did. A higher percentage of patients who got the AHOMSC 200 treatment saw their wounds close completely compared to the placebo group.
Was there a difference between the low and high dose?
Interestingly, no. They didn't find a statistically significant difference in effectiveness between the low and high dose groups.
Okay, so both doses seemed better than placebo. Do we have the numbers?
Please?
Closure rates.
Yeah, so they did what's called an intent-to-treat analysis first. That includes all 21 patients enrolled.
Right, the real-world picture.
In that analysis, the combined AHOMSC 200 groups had a 53% complete wound closure rate.
53%. And the placebo group?
33%.
Okay, so 53 versus 33. That's definitely a difference. Noticeable.
It is. But then they also looked at a specific subgroup, the per-protocol group.
Per protocol, meaning the patients who followed the study rules exactly, stuck to the plan.
Exactly. Completed the treatment as intended, followed all the guidelines. Sometimes this gives a clearer signal of the treatment's potential, though it's a smaller group.
And what did they find in that group? It was 12 patients, right?
Well, patients qualified for the per-protocol analysis, and the results there were, well, pretty striking.
How striking?
In the ANCO-MSC 200 treatment arms within that group, 100% wound closure.
100%. Seriously?
That's what the press release states. 100% closure rate in the treatment group compared to only 20% in the placebo control group within that per protocol set.
Wow. Okay, 100% versus 20%. Now, it's a small group. Per protocol, we have to remember that.
Absolutely. Need to be cautious interpreting subgroup analyses, especially small ones, but still, that's a very dramatic difference.
Extremely promising, especially for ulcers that had lasted over 2 years on average. So putting the safety and these efficacy numbers together, what are the big takeaways here?
Well, Cytora uses the phrase game changer in their release. And, based on this phase 12A data, you can see why they'd be optimistic.
Yeah, I mean, a safe treatment that could potentially heal these incredibly difficult wounds much more effectively, that would be huge.
Absolutely massive. Especially, as they point out, for patients who just aren't responding well to what's already available.
So what's next for Cytora? How do they move this forward?
The plan outlined is to apply for an investigational new drug status, an IND.
Okay. The next regulatory step? When?
They're targeting this second half of 2025 for that IND submission.
And if that gets approved.
Then they can move to a larger phase 2 trial, specifically for DFUs. They anticipate starting that sometime in 2026.
Right. So encouraging results, but still ways to go. More trials needed, bigger groups of patients.
That's the standard path, absolutely. You need to confirm these findings in larger, more diverse populations. But this early data provides a strong reason to take those next steps.
And it seems Cytora sees potential beyond just DFUs for these cells, right?
They do. The release mentions their pipeline includes work on neurodegenerative diseases, things like Parkinson's, multiple system atrophy MSA, and Alzheimer's.
So applying this regenerative potential elsewhere.
Seems like it. They even mentioned they have a phase 1 study ongoing right now for MSA using this technology.
Interesting. Broad potential. And they credit Professor Sandu Pataru from Tel Aviv University as the scientific founder.
Yes, important to acknowledge the foundational science. His lab's work discovering and characterizing these oral mucosa stem cells is clearly the bedrock of Cytora's approach.
Okay, so let's try and summarize this deep dive. We've looked at diabetic foot ulcers, a really serious, costly problem with treatments that don't always work.
Right. Big unmet need.
Then we looked at Cytora's approach using these unique stem cells from the mouth, HOMSCs. They seem to have special healing properties, maybe bypass some of the issues diabetes causes in healing.
And they appear scalable and potentially safe from an immune rejection standpoint.
And this first phase 12A trial, while small, showed really positive signs. Good safety, no immune reaction detected.
And promising efficacy, especially in that per-protocol group showing 100% closure, though we need to be careful with that specific number from a small subset. But the overall trend was clearly positive compared to placebo.
Definitely. So the takeaway is these results suggest Cytora might be onto something potentially quite significant for treating these hard-to-heal DFUs, a novel approach showing early promise.
Agreed. The unique origin and apparent resilience of these cells in a diabetic context are key points. It's definitely worth watching as they move towards larger trials.
So thinking beyond this specific trial, it makes you wonder, right? If these oral stem cells have such unique regenerative power, even in the tough environment of diabetes, what other chronic conditions might benefit? Maybe things involving poor healing or ongoing inflammation elsewhere in the body.
That's a great question. The potential seems broad given their origin. But of course, the flip side is considering the challenges. What hurdles remain to actually get this from promising early data to a real widespread clinical treatment? It's never a straight line.
Definitely not. Let's think about there. Okay, that wraps up our deep dive for today. Thanks for joining us.